All right, so this this is the last of the podcast for Chapter 6 of the Body Systems unit. And so what we're going to spend some time doing is breaking down the interactions between these different systems. So the main question here that I'm asking you is, how do the body systems interact? And the context that I actually want to talk about before we talk about the systems is that all of these systems work together in that overall in a way that helps us stay alive. But what does that mean? And I want you to think back to maybe you remember this from ninth grade biology, the characteristics of life. And if you don't remember the whole list, that's okay. But really, what does that mean? And what does it mean to be alive? And it depends on who you ask. If you look at your notes from ninth grade, if you still have those, you'll see that there's a list of things that we call the characteristics of life. But if you ask other people, if you ask biochemists and scientists who study protein structure and things like that, they give you actually a slightly different definition, although it builds upon one of the major characteristics of life, and that is the ability to maintain homeostasis. Now, homeostasis is a key word, and that's just maintaining some kind of internal balance. And that could be about a whole host of things. It could be temperature, pH, solute concentration, whatever. But it's the ability to keep that ideal balance when the environment changes. When the environment changes. That's the delta, changes. So that's a key idea, and so we're going to make sure we talk about homeostasis when we talk about how these systems interact. But on a side note, there's one other idea that I want to bring up, and that is the idea of cellular respiration. So cellular So these systems are all in the human body. We don't do photosynthesis, we do cellular respiration. So we take the products of photosynthesis and make something out of it. So the process of cellular respiration is, in essence, and we'll go into more detail about this in the next unit, but the overall idea is that we take oxygen out of the atmosphere and we take glucose, which I'm going to write as C6H12O6, but that's glucose or sugar that the plants made. We take those two things through a series of processes that we'll learn some more about. We make carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. And this is the key. This is what the ATP is the energy molecule that we're focused on and what we really want and we need in order to maintain homeostasis. So when we talk about these systems down below, filling in this chart, we're going to talk a little bit about ATP and this process. But notice that there's some key reactants that we've talked about, but not in this context. So we've talked about oxygen gas, think about the respiratory system, and we talked about glucose, think about the digestive system. We've talked about ATP explicitly when we talked about the nervous system, when going through active transport, but we see active transport in the digestive system as well. We see use of ATP when pumping a muscle in the transport system. ATP is also used in the immune system by a phagocyte, and we use energy to contract our muscles for the respiratory system. ATP is also used in the reproductive system, and we'll talk about all those things in just a few minutes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and zoom in, because what I'm going to do is go through this chart. So I take a minute to jot this down, or maybe jot this down at the end. I don't know how you want to do this, but I'm going to, in all these white boxes, I'm going to write some notes, but obviously it looks kind of small, so I'm going to zoom in, and we're going to give this a try and see if this works. Alright, so I'm going to look at the digestive system and transport system. So I'm going to write in this box right here. Let me make my pen a little smaller. Okay, so what we're talking about here with the digestive and transport system is really the place that they interact is at the let's see if this is working. Sorry, give me a second here. That's not what I want either. Okay, sorry about that. So I think I figured it out. But what I'm gonna be doing is writing a couple notes, but talking mostly. So I'll write a few key words, talk through the connections, and I hope that you continue to write down beyond what I simply am writing. So the connection between the digestive and transport system really happens at the villi. Sorry, let me pick a color. At the villi and microvilli. And if you look in your notes, you'll notice that the villi and microvilli are within the small intestines. These are the bumps in the small intestines that increase the surface area, but also contain the capillary bed within them, which allow for the nutrients that have been digested through the transport system, through the digestive system, to diffuse across the membrane into the capillary bed, so that those monomers, those small molecules, can be transported through the bloodstream to every single cell in the body, so that the cells can then assimilate them. But one of the things that I mentioned was diffusion. But the other thing that is also happening there is there are lots of proteins in the membrane there, and so there's active transport happening as well, which uses energy. And if you go back to the equation for cellular respiration, that active transport requires ATP, which was made from a process that used oxygen from the respiratory system and sugars, glucose, from the digestive system. So in order to continue to absorb sugars at the small intestine and some other molecules, the villi also need to make ATP from sugars that it had already absorbed to make ATP to continue to absorb more nutrients later on. And so that's really the connection here. Now we talk about digestive and immune system. Know that the digestive system, the immune system has several parts to it. So we've got skin, we've got mucus, we've got helper T cells, we've got antibodies that attack antigens, we've got phagocytes. Well, the antibodies and the phagocytes and all of that require or use proteins, and that's really the connection to the the digestive system. So the immune system uses proteins, but proteins come into our body through the digestive system. The digestive system takes these proteins and digests them into amino acids, so that they cross the villi, the small intestines that we just talked about, into the bloodstream to every single cell. So the ribosomes in every single cell can take these amino acids and make proteins that our body need out of them. These proteins sometimes are antibodies. And those antibodies are used in our immune system to ward off anything else. And these antibodies are transported around in our bloodstream, which goes back to the transport system. Okay? The digestive and respiratory system, digestive, the main thing that when we talk about respiratory system, we're mostly talking about glucose, the need for glucose. So the digestive system gets our glucose for us, whereas the respiratory system gets the oxygen gas that we need. And they get transported around the blood to get to every single cell, so that these things can be used in cellular respiration to make that all-important molecule ATP. The nervous system and the digestive system are related because there are several muscles in our digestive system. So one of them are we have muscles in our mouth and the mandibles. This is a muscle. And when muscles move, they use ATP that was generated from this process that we were just talking about. But these muscles also are controlled by nerves. So we've got the mandible, there's peristalsis. which is in the esophagus, which pushes food down. Down into the stomach. The stomach also mechanically digests, so there's another muscle. It's also controlled by nerves. And then we've got some hormones that are involved as well that are created by the pancreas that we learned a little bit about when we talked about this unit, even though the pancreas we first learned about in the digestive system. And the two hormones you need to know are glucagon and insulin, which relate to blood sugar control as this relates to the digestive system. So if there's too much blood sugar, too much glucose in your blood after you eat something, let's say you have a high glycemic diet, you eat a lot of sugary food, you have high blood sugar, so your body's going to produce insulin to pull the extra sugar out and store it as glycogen in your body if you're non-diabetic. And then when your blood sugar is low, meaning you haven't eaten for a while and you haven't added any sugar into your blood through the villi of your small intestine, then glucagon gets released by the pancreas to break down the glycogen, which chops up, essentially glycogen is a large molecule made of lots and lots of glucose pieces stuck together, chops that up into the small glucose pieces and releases those into the blood, increasing the blood sugar level. But this is a hormone. These hormones travel through the blood, through the transport system, to help regulate blood sugar level. So here's a connection between hormones, transport system, and digestive system. And then the reproductive system, and the digestive system. So one of the things that's really, really important are the sugars that we get from the digestive system. And specifically, these sugars are used through cellular respiration to make ATP so that sperm can swim. So they can use their flagellum to swim. And they get some of that when they are traveling through the vas deferens. They get some of that fuel source. They have a mitochondria in them so that they can make some ATP on their journey. But the reproductive system gets all of its building blocks, all of the things in our body. Every one of these systems is connected to the digestive system because they're made out of parts or molecules that we got in our body through the digestive system. So we can't build anything unless we're eating. We can't grow unless we eat. And really it comes down to a molecular level, okay? So this is the case how it connects to the male reproductive system, the female as well, because when the eggs are released, they have to still travel down the oviduct or the fallopian tubes, and the fallopian tubes contract, and they also have cilia that are moving using ATP to pull that egg down into the uterus. And there are several other muscle contractions that are occurring, but it's all using ATP. So I hope, but whenever I talk about ATP, I hope you make an automatic connection to digestive system, respiratory system, and transport system. Sorry, digestive, respiratory, and transport. I'm not sure if I said that the first time. Okay, so let's go down now to talk about the transport system and how it works with the immune system. So antibodies, one don't want to say live, but they are in the blood. And so they're constantly patrolling your body, constantly are on guard, looking for an antigen for which it's already created an antibody to attack. And if we have a new antigen, then we have to make antibodies for the first time to attack that. But if you've already had a response to an antigen, your body already has these antibodies on reserve waiting in case it finds the antigen again. Now we're talking about, transport and respiratory. Okay, transport and respiratory, this all happens at the alveoli. So there's a capillary bed or network, and oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged here. So oxygen moves into the bloodstream to be carried around for later to be used for cellular respiration, and carbon dioxide comes out of the blood into the alveoli to be exhaled, and carbon dioxide was one of the byproducts, one of the products of cellular respiration, and that we need to get rid of. Okay, now we're talking about transport and nervous system. Okay, so there are nerves that control speed of heartbeat. That's HB of heartbeat. So we have a single nerve that touches the heart and sends a signal to speed up the heartbeat, and there's a separate nerve that slows it down. And then there's also a hormone that you know called adrenaline, made out of the adrenal gland, transports through the blood to the heart and speeds up the heartbeat. So sometimes you even feel your heartbeat going really, really fast, and that's because of the adrenaline that is speeding up the reaction. And then we're talking about, transport and reproduction. So transport continues to bring nutrients, and I won't go into the details of this, but that increased transport aids the reproductive system in sexual reproduction. But okay, I won't go into too much of that because that's beyond what we need to talk about. And if you understand what I'm saying, you got it. If not, it's okay that you don't get it yet. We'll talk about it later. Or if you have questions, you can ask those, okay? Let's see. So now we're talking about immune system and respiratory. Yep. All right, immune and respiratory. We have our respiratory system is lined with mucus. That's the snot that's in your nose or in your mouth goes all the way down into the alveoli, and this is sticky and it catches pathogens, and when we cough up or sneeze, we get rid of those pathogens. And I think that's the most direct connection. They're more especially tied to cellular respiration, but that should be fine. So back to immune system and nerves and hormones. Actually, I'm gonna skip this because this is not really all that direct in our content, and you won't see questions about this. And I'm looking at being at almost 20 minutes, so I'm not going to worry about this, and you don't need to worry about this box here. But now you're talking about immune system and reproductive system, and do the same thing. Going to the respiratory system and nerves and hormones. There are nerves that lead to effector cells, and in this case these effector cells are the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles that change the volume of your chest cavity or your thoracic cavity, which changes the pressure, which causes a pressure gradient, which moves air in or out of your system. And then the respiratory system and the reproductive system, again, the main connection here is through cellular respiration. And I've gone over this several times, so I'm not going to go into too much detail there. And then the last thing is the nervous system and the reproductive system. So, again, it all comes down to nerves and muscles that control the functions of the reproductive system. Okay? And I think that you can see that there are a lot more details in some of these connections than others. And sometimes some of these systems interact through yet another system. So it's quite complicated, but you need to be able to transition back and forth. And I think that a good way to think about this is through this equation of cellular respiration and the ability to maintain homeostasis, to keep some kind of balance. And that's really where ATP comes into play, especially through nerves, through muscle contraction of the respiratory system, muscle contractions for the reproductive system, the immune system through phagocytosis, the transport system pumping the heart, and pushing blood through the system, and the digestive system of transporting molecules across the membrane through active transport. Okay, so I hope that this helps, and that now you have lots and lots of resources to help you prepare for the test. Know that knowing this alone, memorizing this alone, may not be all you need to do to prepare, and it doesn't touch every piece of knowledge that you need to know for this test, but this might be a good way to frame some of the key points, okay?